sometimes it's hard to pinpoint why certain beer packaging works. It's it's a sector that has been so inundated in the past, and especially in the past 7 or 8 years, with absolutely super high level of design and illustration. So sometimes pushing against the current a little bit can help, and that's sort of what you're seeing here. The other thing that you're seeing in beer packaging is in the past, a lot of beer packaging was sort of illustrated, and that's often sort of price prohibitive because you're basically hiring an illustrator. There's not a lot of design firms that can illustrate good enough to sort of have their stuff on beer cans. Can't really get that across. So what's happening now in a lot of beer packaging is there's a real sort of push to sort of render things that are different, right? So absolutely, if you can do a great illustration, icon, line work, all of that, that's great. There's a lot of design firms that get hired to do these things that can't do that, so they look for other alternatives. And as they're coming up with these things, it's pretty interesting because you're starting to see things that wouldn't necessarily be considered standard practice in beer packages. And there are still plenty of examples of more traditional packaging and illustration, and here we have the sort of the classic monoline that we looked at. Interesting shaped labels, sort of vintage typography, minimal sort of icon. So an example of a little bit sort of more hand-rendered looking illustration and a complete lack of typography, which I don't suggest for this project, but you certainly am seeing more of it. One of the things to really be aware of is if you're presenting your series, are they consistent? How does the type work? Things to really sort of make your packaging stand out are secondary elements that we've talked about in the past. So you see some of those in this one. This is driftwood. This is done by a small agency on Vancouver Island, like basically 2 people. They always come up with sort of interesting, less traditional sort of image making techniques. Some interesting imagery here, pretty sexist, but it does sort of harken back to the sort of pinup girls from the 50s. These make a pretty fun set when you see that. You have to sort of stack them to see the entire figure, and really sort of charming combination of a little bit naive illustration, but pretty well balanced and really nice colors and type on top of it. So again, you sort of see a little bit of the monoline technique being used here, adding color elements to it. Some really sort of a bit of a different approach, right? So these actually have paper wrappers on them, and they actually have little tags on them, so there's no hard fast rules on what they have to be. Don't do this. Here's some so going back to some of our original sort of original video that we looked at, here's a really great example of real balance between pure sort of vintage sort of label feel, so you can see the stamping down below, but they've countered that a little bit with really sort of fresh colors and layering of type, which then sort of brings it in brings it into a more modern feel, and these are local as well. So a little bit another interesting sort of modern approach where you know it's really kind of creating these interesting forms, nice topography that sort of is a combination between modern, vintage, a little bit Swiss topography, and then these kind of abstract images. You just have to make sure you get it really right with this type of thing. And some really vintage ones here, obviously uh, sort of tiki inspired. And some sort of pure typographic ones here. And then again, some local ones from just down the road. And then this is a great example of what you can do with simple, really just simple icon illustrations. Nothing particularly amazing about them, but when you sort of collect them and balance them off with sort of complementary type and label, it works pretty nicely. So some real sort of vintage feel that sort of again harkens back to old alcohol labels in here, and then pure monoline sort of approach. So you can sort of see that as you go through these, you know, they tend to fall into different categories. So, you know, iconic, illustrative, typographic. You do see some photo collage. So there is no sort of, you know, here's just a very, very simple iconic approach that works pretty nicely, especially with the flat bottle. Now, when it comes to the packaging, that's really your opportunity to sort of extend the brand and tell the brand story, right? So you can tell the brand story on the labels, but you can really expand on that story, including the actually writing, you know, putting the brand story on the packaging itself. You know, simply just sort of using really a basic packaging with nothing else on it is a bit of a missed opportunity. So you can see sort of core 4, they actually show the bottles on there, but you don't see the bottles, so you have to make those kinds of decisions. Can you partially see them? How do you use the side? So you can sort of see Indeed here takes their really kind of illustrative cans and actually renders them as illustration on the packaging, and then builds that story out around them. So you can sort of see the forest and all the sort of elements of the caps on the back. You'll see the actual story of where they came from, and then you know you'll see that quite often. You know, for this type of project, I think you know you're better off sort of trying to tell an interesting story than trying to go for simplicity. I selected Trophy in here because it really is a really beautiful set of beers. The labels are absolutely stunning. But then when they went to do the actual packaging, you can sort of see this sort of custom shape that looks like a tree. They went completely black and white on it so that because you can actually see the beer in the holder. And then they went pure icon and type, and what a nice what a nice counter to the sort of the very illustrative and colorful approach on the packaging. Totally works because the labels are primarily white, so they haven't used the entire label to do illustration. So it ends up being a really nice complement to the actual beer itself. So using, I just put Widmer in here just so you can sort of see, okay, these guys did sort of this gold foil or gold metallic ink on the actual beer cans. Nothing really amazing, but you can sort of see how you can extend that brand, whether that's in the background of your dimension shots or whether your box or packaging picks that up. Now I put Punta Esta in here just because you do have to create basically a poster ad for your beer. And again, it really should be an extension of the beer, sort of selling the virtues of it. It can be very sort of an extension of the brand, absolutely. And I put these ones in here because they're really a great example of what you can actually do. So if you look at Darken over here, that's a post. That's basically that relatively. I'm not sure if it's a poster, but it really is a poster because it's you see the type down at the bottom, you see the render, and then in the background they actually continue that render, which is fairly easy to do in Dimensions, and then you see the same sort of thing here with Revival. And then some other ways to sort of extend the brand. So if you're doing a poster, you can sort of see that these guys have sort of used this wooden background. These guys over here have extended the packaging right onto the poster, so you see basically the ingredients, you see the set of icons. So all of those work pretty well to create the actual posters themselves. So these ones are really good examples of just taking the bottles, then using all the elements from the brand, so elements from the box, there's icons and type, creating this sort of big stew of elements, and at the end of the day it looks pretty good. There's some balance issues on the one on the left, but a nice way to do it. And so a couple examples of concept. Tickety Brew, not the best concept, but it is a concept. Hop Fly, so going pure, like 2 colors, purely iconic, jamming together a fly and a hop, obviously, and then the one on the right going with a more vintage kind of label approach, all black and white. And you see a little bit of that with these ones again. Fallen Queen, very sort of taking the monoline approach, turning it into full illustration, so adding color, keeping it very iconic, using black letter, a bit of a different black letter approach. And then some ones here that are purely abstract, so creating really interesting abstract images in Illustrator. Some really great character illustrations, again purely iconic and type approach, filling the can with absolute just packing it with imagery. So have a look at this Mexican chocolate one. It is really great. It's a combination of icons but also a really nice symmetry and type going on. Farmhouse Ales makes a lot of sense. So a nice example of how the kind of the warning feeling of the skull is carried over to this sort of warning system that happens on the box. an interesting sort of approach to do the cutouts on the box. So if we touch base on the brief, um, the actual presentation date is a little bit different on here, so that we can do a joint. You can do a joint presentation. So the final packaging and everything in David's class is going to be presented on April 13th. So what you're going to need for my class is basically 3 beer. That's what you need. 3 beer and a carrier. So you can choose any shape you like. Include the Folkhouse logo word mark on the packaging. So probably you're going to want to put that on the box or carrier. So the names of the beer, types of the beer. You may include parts of the brand story on the label, front or back. Definitely you want to have some sort of brand story on the carrying case. You can also consider like the neck, a tag, anything like that. A carrying case size and type of carrying case is to be determined, and I can show you examples of last year. There's not much from a legal requirement. You definitely have to have the word beer, and in French, bière. It gets more complicated if you have a lot of different ingredients. Your carrying case should have a UPC code on the bottom of it, the number of bottles by volume, the alcohol by volume, and the beer ingredients as well. So that's not a lot on there. The schedule, obviously, today is, when you see this, is going to be March the 18th, and so we're going to be working on sketches and review them before the end of class. We'll have a studio day in between. Let me just check my schedule. So basically what we're looking at is March 18th, March 25th. That is not the last class. That's from last year, so we're just going to delete that. April 1st, April 8th, and then final presentations for both class in April 13th. I'm leaving them pretty open so that we can look at progress and sort of workshop things in class, get lots of feedback. So basically what you're going to do is the 3 bottles or cans, any type of carrier. You want to consider the background when you do these things. Anything you want to add, like tags or anything like that, you can do that as well. Part of your grade is going to be basically, it's going to be a poster basically. And once you have it done, the poster is basically going to feature the product, help highlight the qualities of the beer. That will be 11 by 17 in InDesign. So we sort of looked at examples of those. So that will be the second part. So the first part is worth 25%. The poster is worth 10%. The posters typically will tell a story or use the backgrounds that feature either the ingredients or elements, attract the proper demographic. On these things, anything goes, so use your imagination. So if we sort of just do a quick review of what we looked at last year. Okay, so we're going to look at a few here. So not all of them are illustrative, so you can sort of see this first one by Marta called Hopster. You can see she has the Folkhouse logo on the back. She's kind of done this interesting approach to showing the label itself. But the idea that it doesn't all have to be, if you don't think you can do an illustration or an icon or anything like that, Marta has done a pretty interesting, sophisticated looking collage that works really nicely, and she's given it lots of space around it, so that works pretty well. The next one was Brett, and Brett won an award for this packaging. But you can sort of see Brett is not an image maker, real, he can't illustrate at all. So he did this really nice kind of colored patterns based on these ideas for flags. And then he actually got the box from Adobe Stock. But yeah, really nice sort of carryover. The only really carryover he had from his logo was that it was the shape of a flag. So that's kind of what these are meant to be. This is Josh's, so he did the he did these kind of serpents. Pretty interesting. So you can sort of see with all of these that they're the tie-in to the Folkhouse brand. Um, it doesn't necessarily have to have an absolute continuation. So you can sort of see with a lot of these that they can work on their own, or they can also work along. They also complement the sort of Folkhouse brand itself, and then you can sort of see with Liam's, sort of his whole logo was sort of based around this old harmonica, and so he found these kind of three old type of characters that were prevalent in BC, and that was his tie-in. So a lot of the students put the logo on the back of the cans. Many of them did. Many of them put them on the box, and you can also see that a few of them use sort of different sizes, which is why I included the sort of glass bottles that I show here, just because those were made in Illustrator and then brought into Photoshop and then Dimensions. So if you have an idea for a different type of bottle, obviously you can't really have a different type of can, but you can absolutely do that as well.